Lesson 2, Unit 2. The Adaptive Project Planning Approach. The adaptive planning approach formulates the strategies to achieve the project objectives. It also arranges or creates the means required to achieve the goals, and it defines how the project is implemented, monitored, controlled, and closed. The adaptive planning approach is the identification and selection of the best approach, the best methodology to plan, implement, and monitor the project. The approach will help you answer these planning questions: why we do the project, where we will work, when will activities take place, how will we implement it, what needs to be delivered, and who will do the work. The approach also helps identify the priorities, optimize the resources, control the constraints, and avoid surprises. It's important to differentiate between the plans that were presented to the donor in the project proposal and the plans that are required to implement the project. The plans in the proposal are high level. They're usually done in a hurry to meet the deadline to submit the proposal, and the information used might have been limited or incomplete. These plans are used to show the cost and time estimates to complete the project and sign the contract, but don't include the plans to manage the project. It is wrong to assume you can use these plans to implement the project. Another important consideration is that there could be a significant time from the moment the plans were developed to the time the project is approved, making some of the initial assumptions and suppositions about the context irrelevant. The implementation needs more detailed plans that use more and current information than the team will use to guide their work. The management plans are detailed instructions on how to manage every aspect of the project. They are used to monitor progress and ensure the achievement of the objectives. One of the first decisions in defining the planning approach is to identify the level of effort and detail of the project management plans required to implement and monitor the project. The level of effort will depend on the level of complexity, the level of risk, the size of your project, the experience of your project team, and the constraints that were identified in your project. A simple chart can help determine the level for each plan. The team can rate each area to determine which plan will need more detail. In this example, a simple chart facilitates the ranking of each area with values from 0 to 5. A level 5 means that the plans need to be developed as detailed as possible. In the example, we see that the budget and the contract management plans will need more effort and detail than the other plans. One of the reasons could be is that the donor has strict policies on budget management, that there are more risks that will impact the budget, and that this is a complex and dynamic economic environment with high currency fluctuations, which is why you need to put more effort and time to develop these plans. On the other extreme, you find that the team and information plans don't need much effort and detail. One of the reasons could be that you have a team that has significant experience and they don't need much control, and the level of information requirement is not significant. This chart will help you organize the planning sessions by the effort required for each plan. The next step is to start preparing the planning sessions. As the project manager, you need to organize and prepare a series of meetings to develop all the implementation plans. You will need to prepare a detailed agenda for the planning sessions. You also need to identify subject matter experts. These are people within the organization or external consultants that can bring their experience during the planning sessions, and could be other key stakeholders that can bring expertise and knowledge. You need to distribute some of the project information to the participants so they can become familiar before the session starts, so you don't waste too much time during the planning session explaining what the project is. You also need to obtain plans and lessons learned from previous projects that can be used as a reference during these sessions. This is information the team could look at for examples of what successful projects did to develop management plans. Let's look at the planning phase again. In the project cycle, we identify the planning phase as going through this cycle in which there is a lot of effort happening during the phases between initiation and implementation. The planning phase starts before the initiation phase is complete and might extend well into the implementation phase, where you're going to be improving your plans based on the information and lessons you collect during the implementation phase. This is an important phase, and sometimes project managers don't place too much attention and effort to develop all the plans into the required level of detail and try to implement the project right away. There are many risks in doing that. One of them is that you might find out during implementation that many of the plans you develop in a rush are lacking details, which can cause delays and quality problems. The next step is to identify the templates, procedures, and tools to develop all the project plans. Depending on the amount of data and detail you need, you might need a special software. For example, the development of the schedule and the budget plans. You will also need to train your team in the use of the templates and the tools, as they will need to use these tools during the implementation and monitoring phases. You also need to define the process to develop and approve all the project plans. It doesn't need to be complex, but the idea is to develop a quality control process to make sure you're not missing anything important. The planning method will depend on the type of project. In an adaptive project, the planning approach is participatory, meaning that you need to bring in more people and stakeholders to participate in the planning sessions. It is also cyclical, meaning that you're constantly adapting it. It is more results-oriented, so there's going to be more focus on outcomes than on activities. Plans are developed in phases, and it's a learning and discovery process. When you have a traditional project that has no risk, it's not complex, it's relatively small, then the approach will be non-participatory, meaning that you can do the project plan with just the team, and it's activity-oriented. In a traditional project, the goal is to complete all the plans, and there is no need to adapt them or modify them. There is more focus on command and control. Where you are on this scale, depending on the information and what you know about your project, you might be able to choose the type of planning approach, from a highly adaptive to a high traditional approach, or even a mix of both. In traditional linear project management, the approach is to implement activities under the assumptions that all events affecting the project are predictable, that activities are well understood by everybody, and there is no need to revisit the plans. Unfortunately, this approach proves not to be very effective given the level of uncertainty on many development projects. What happened is that the original assumptions under which the project plan was built changed, and in some cases in dramatic ways. What was originally assumed to be true is no longer valid. Assumptions about approvals, additional funding, economic and social conditions change dynamically, and you need to have the flexibility to adapt to these plans. In the adaptive cyclical project management, the approach is to use the adaptive planning cycle. The goal is not just to complete your plans, but to plan during the life of the project. In development projects, the moment you start work, you will find that many of the original assumptions and risks have changed. That means that no matter how good your plans are, by the time you're implemented, there will be changes in the context that will force you to make modifications. After you complete the plans for the first phase, you move to the implementation phase where you do the work, you check the progress, you try to see the variances between what you plan and what are the results. With that information, you act. You adapt the plans to improve them, so that in the next phase, you incorporate those lessons. You incorporate what you have learned, and you improve your plans so that they reflect the changes in the context. That is the idea. It is an iterative planning cycle that happens many times during the life of the project, and you don't need to wait until the end of the project to adapt or modify or make improvements. You can do it every 3 months, every 6 months, depending on the length and complexity of your project. The idea is that planning is more important than a plan. It is a continuous process of planning through the life of the project. The closer that you get to the end of the project, the less you're going to need to make changes and updates. But the early stages is when it is needed the most, because you don't know much about what's going to happen in the project, so there is a need to be flexible in your planning approach. When you develop the project schedule, you will need to identify the moments when you will start each cycle. It could be every month or every 2 months. On each cycle, you develop the detailed plans and use the lessons learned from the previous phase to make improvements and adapt your plans to the changing conditions. As a project manager, you should find this opportunity to review the original assumptions and make the appropriate changes to the plans, especially in the areas of scheduling, risk, and relationship with key stakeholders. This approach consists of a series of iterative cycles, allowing the project team to constantly evaluate the implementation and results obtained and obtain the feedback from beneficiaries and other key stakeholders. The people doing the work should be actively involved in planning the project. When they get involved in the decisions, they become motivated to get it right and they will own it. It is helpful to involve your key stakeholders in the planning sessions. This could be the internal support functions of the organization, such as finance or procurement. Also, involve the partners, who can provide with valuable insights, information to manage risk, constraints, and problems with resource availability. Planning should not be done hastily. It takes time in order to get the plans that can become useful for the team and the key stakeholders.